A man in a stained delivery jacket stepped in front of a restaurant owner. Not because he was brave, not because he was rich, but because nobody else would move. Dominic Falcone looked him up and down, laughed, and said, "You're nobody. Get out of my way." And that's when everything changed. What Dominic didn't know, what Nathan didn't know, was that the woman in the wheelchair behind him was worth more than his entire city block. But that's not even the most shocking part of this story. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now. You're going to want every part of this. The night was supposed to be perfect. Nathan Cole had been planning it for 3 weeks. Not with a calendar, not with a spreadsheet. Just with the quiet, stubborn determination of a man who had made a promise to his daughter and intended to keep it no matter what it cost him. And in Nathan's case, that phrase wasn't figurative. It had an exact dollar amount. $47.12. That was what sat in his checking account on the evening of October 14th, a Thursday, when he helped Sophie button the back of her dress and told her she looked like $1 million. "Dad," she said, turning to look at him in the bathroom mirror, her dark hair pulled back the way her mother used to wear it. "You say that every time." "And every time it's true." She rolled her eyes the way 11-year-olds do when they're trying not to smile. She smiled anyway. He'd chosen Bissimo because Sophie had pointed to it 3 months ago through the car window on one of their delivery routes. She'd pressed her palm flat against the glass and said, "Dad, look at those lights." Gold lanterns hung along the awning. Valets in black jackets stood at the curb. It looked like the kind of place that existed in a different world, which, for Nathan Cole, it did. "Someday, Bug," he'd told her. "How about if I get straight A's?" she'd said immediately. He should have hesitated. He knew he should have. The practical part of his brain, the part that tracked every gas station receipt, that bought the store-brand cereal, that had sold his wedding ring 2 years ago just to keep the electricity on. That part screamed at him to say, "Let's think about it." "Deal," he said instead. She got the A's. Of course she did. Sophie did everything with total commitment, the same way her mother had. So Nathan did what he always did when his back was against the wall. He figured it out. He picked up 2 extra shifts. He skipped lunches. He called in a favor from his buddy Marcus, who ran a side gig detailing cars, and he worked a Saturday doing that too. And when the night of October 14th arrived, he had exactly $47.12 and a reservation at Bissimo under the name Cole, Party of 2, 7 o'clock. The restaurant held the reservation because he'd called 4 days in advance. He did not tell them he was a delivery driver. He did not tell them he was a widower. He did not tell them that the blazer he was wearing had been his father-in-law's and still smelled faintly of Old Spice if you got close enough. He told them, "Party of 2, 7 o'clock. Cole." They said, "We'll see you then, Mr. Cole." And for 1 week, that sentence made him feel like a different kind of man. They arrived at 6:50. The sidewalk outside Bissimo was everything the window had promised. The lanterns were warm and amber. The maitre d' stood behind a small podium just inside the glass doors, and the sound of low jazz drifted out every time someone entered. Nathan adjusted his blazer. Sophie stood beside him with her hands clasped in front of her, wearing the expression of a child trying very hard to behave like an adult. "Ready?" Nathan asked. "I've been ready since Tuesday," she said. He laughed. He reached for the door. That's when the black town car pulled up. It wasn't remarkable, not at first. Town cars came and went at places like this. But the driver moved with a kind of practiced urgency, stepping out quickly, opening the rear door, and then moving to the trunk to retrieve a folded wheelchair. He set it up alongside the car with the efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. And from the back seat, a woman emerged. carefully, deliberately, with the composed effort of a person who had long ago stopped caring whether anyone was watching. She was somewhere in her early 40s, dark blazer, silk blouse, hair and a precise cut that said she paid for it. She lowered herself into the wheelchair with the quiet dignity of someone completely at home in her own body, then looked up and straightened her jacket and said something to her driver in a low voice. He nodded and stepped back. She wheeled toward the door. Nathan held it open. "Thank you," she said, glancing up at him briefly. Her eyes were sharp and dark, the kind of eyes that cataloged everything in a room before deciding what to say about it. She had a leather portfolio across her lap and a reservation card in her hand. "Of course," Nathan said. Sophie watched the whole thing with wide, attentive eyes. They all moved inside at roughly the same time. Nathan and Sophie approaching the maitre d', the woman in the wheelchair slightly ahead, her driver remaining outside. And that's when Dominic Falcone appeared. Nathan didn't know his name yet. He learned it later. What he saw in that moment was a man in a dark suit who materialized from the back of the restaurant with the particular walk of someone who owned the room. Short, deliberate steps, chin slightly elevated, hands clasped behind his back. He was perhaps 60, with silver at his temples and a tan that came from somewhere expensive. He smiled at nothing in particular as he moved through his own dining room, touching the back of a chair here, nodding at a waiter there. The performance of a man who wanted everyone to see him being generous with his presence. Then he saw the wheelchair. The smile didn't disappear. It did something worse. It recalibrated. It became polite. "Good evening," he said, stopping in front of the woman. "Do you have a reservation?" She handed him the card. "Sullivan, 8 o'clock. I'm a few minutes early." He looked at the card. He looked at her. He looked at the wheelchair. And then he did the thing that Nathan would replay in his mind for years. He turned away from her and looked at his maitre d' with a particular expression. Small. Private. A look that said, "Handle this." The maitre d', a young man with a nervous energy about him, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I need to inform you that our dining room has some limitations regarding—" "I called ahead," she said simply. 3 weeks ago. I specifically asked about accessibility. Yes, and I understand that. But Mr. Falcone has determined that for safety reasons—" "Safety," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am. The layout of our dining room doesn't accommodate—" "I've been in hundreds of restaurants." Her voice was even, controlled, but Nathan could hear something underneath it. Not anger exactly, more like exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had heard this exact sentence in exactly this tone more times than anyone should have to. "I've never once been a safety issue." Dominic stepped back in, smoothly, like a man who was used to ending conversations. "I understand your frustration, but I'm sure you can appreciate that Bissimo has a particular atmosphere to maintain. We simply cannot—" "Cannot what?" Nathan said. Everyone turned. He hadn't planned to speak. He would think about that later. The way the words came out before he consciously decided to say them. It wasn't bravery, not the movie kind. It was more like something in him just refused to be quiet. Maybe it was the look on the woman's face. Maybe it was Sophie standing beside him with her small hand in his, watching, learning, filing everything away the way kids do. Maybe it was just that he'd worked too many extra shifts and skipped too many lunches to stand in front of a man like this and say nothing. "Excuse me?" Dominic said. His voice was perfectly pleasant. It was the pleasantness of a man who had money and lawyers. "You said you can't accommodate her," Nathan said. "I'm asking what exactly you can't do. Because she's sitting in a chair. She's not on fire. She's not making noise. She made a reservation 3 weeks ago, and she's here on time. So I'm curious what the actual obstacle is." The restaurant had gotten quieter, not silent. The jazz was still playing, glasses still clinked, but the tables nearest them had slowed down. People were listening. Dominic's pleasant expression held. "Sir, I don't believe this concerns you." "Dad," Sophie whispered, tugging his hand. He looked down at her. Her eyes were wide, not frightened, but intent, like she was watching something important. "You're right that it doesn't concern me," Nathan said, turning back to Dominic. "But I'd still like to understand. Is there a structural reason she can't come in? A doorway that's too narrow? Because I can see the door from here, and it looks plenty wide." "Sir, or is it the tables? Because I see at least 3 tables along that wall with enough space to—" "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice." "I'm not raising my voice," Nathan said. And he wasn't. He was speaking in the same even tone he used when he called the insurance company. The tone of a man who had learned through hard experience that staying calm made people more uncomfortable than shouting. "I'm asking a simple question. Why can't this woman come in?" Dominic looked at him. Really looked at him. The blazer that was a decade out of style. The shoes that had been resoled once. The delivery driver's hands that didn't quite match the formality of the occasion. And something in his expression shifted. Not anger. Contempt. The specific contempt of a man who had never once questioned his own right to make decisions. "Because," Dominic said, dropping his voice to a register meant only for Nathan, "people come here for a certain experience. And part of that experience is the visual environment I have carefully created. A wheelchair in the middle of my dining room is not consistent with that image. Now." He straightened his jacket. "I've been perfectly reasonable with this woman. I'll comp her a meal, have it delivered. You'll have it delivered," Nathan repeated. "Yes. Like takeout. Like a courtesy." "Okay." Nathan exhaled through his nose. He released Sophie's hand. "So the issue isn't safety. You just said it yourself. It's the image, the way it looks." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Because if it was actually about safety," Nathan continued, "you would have said that when she came in. Instead, you waited for her to ask twice, and then you told her you'd send the food to her car. That's not a safety policy. That's you telling a woman she's not welcome because of how she gets around." "I think you should leave," Dominic said. "We haven't even had dinner yet. I'm rescinding your reservation." Nathan stared at him. "You're kicking us out because I asked a question?" "I'm asking you to leave my restaurant." Dominic's composure was cracking now. Not breaking, but showing the seams. His voice had gone tighter, the pleasantness thinner. "Both of you, right now." "That's discrimination," the woman in the wheelchair said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She hadn't raised her voice either. She sat very still, hands folded on the portfolio in her lap, watching Dominic with an expression that Nathan couldn't quite read. Not hurt, not furious. Something more measured than either. "What you just described to this man," she said, "is discrimination. You said it yourself. The image. My wheelchair doesn't fit your image. That is a violation of the ADA, and it is discrimination." Dominic's face went through several changes very fast. "I want both of you off my property," he said finally. "Right now, or I call the police." "Call them," Nathan said. "Genuinely. Call them. Because I'd love to explain to an officer what you just said about images." He didn't call them. They ended up on the sidewalk. Nathan, Sophie, and the woman whose name he still didn't know. The town car sat at the curb. Her driver was watching from a discreet distance, reading the situation. Sophie had been quiet through the last part of it. Too quiet. Nathan crouched down in front of her, blazer over his knees. "Hey," he said, "talk to me." She looked at him. Her jaw was set in the way she did when she was trying not to cry because she thought she was too old to cry. "It wasn't fair," she said. "No," he said, "it wasn't." "You told him that, though." "Yeah." "Even though he kicked us out." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does that mean we don't get dinner?" He laughed. It came out of him in a rush, slightly too loud, the laugh of a man releasing something he'd been holding. "We will absolutely get dinner," he said. "Best burgers in the city. I know a place." "Better than here?" "Better than here. Bigger portions, too." She thought about that. Then she slipped her hand back into his. "Okay," she said. "But Dad—" "Yeah, Bug?" She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "You're the best dad in the whole world." He held on to that for a second. Then he stood up and turned around. The woman in the wheelchair was watching them. Her driver had appeared beside her, not intervening, just present. But her eyes were on Nathan with that same cataloging expression, sharp and still. "I'm sorry about your dinner," she said. "Don't apologize," Nathan said. "You didn't do anything wrong." "No," she said. "But that's not what I meant." She paused. "I meant that you gave something up tonight. For a stranger." Nathan shrugged, slightly uncomfortable with the weight of what she was saying. "I didn't give anything up. I said something true." "Most people don't." He didn't have an answer for that. "My name is Mara," she said. She extended her hand. He shook it. "Nathan, this is Sophie." Sophie gave a small, formal wave, which she'd apparently decided was more appropriate than a handshake. "You have a very brave father," Mara said to her. "I know," Sophie said, like it was obvious, like she'd known it for a long time. What Nathan didn't know, what he couldn't have known standing on that sidewalk in his father-in-law's blazer, was that a young woman at the table nearest the window had been filming on her phone for the last 4 minutes. She'd started recording when Nathan said, "I'm asking what exactly you can't do." She caught all of it. Dominic's face, Nathan's voice, the woman in the wheelchair sitting with her hands folded, composed and dignified. She caught Sophie's small, serious face. She caught Dominic saying, "The visual environment I have carefully created." She caught Nathan saying, "That's discrimination." She caught the moment Dominic told them to leave. She posted it at 9:47 that night with a caption, "This man in Wilmington defended a woman in a wheelchair from being turned away at Bissimo tonight. Watch until the end. Share this." By midnight, it had 40,000 views. By the time Nathan and Sophie got home, burgers eaten, Sophie already asleep against his shoulder in the car, the woman at the window had 300 comments asking if anyone knew who the man in the blazer was. Nathan put Sophie to bed, hung up the blazer, washed his hands, and sat down on the couch in the dark apartment the way he always did when the day was finally over. He thought about the look on Dominic's face. He thought about Sophie's voice whispering, "The best dad in the whole world." He thought about Mara's handshake, firm, brief, the handshake of someone accustomed to meaning it. He thought, "At least I said something." He thought, "At least she knows someone said something." He thought, "We really do make good burgers here." Then he fell asleep on the couch with the TV off and the apartment quiet, completely unaware that by morning 100,000 people would know his name. And completely unaware that the woman in the wheelchair, the woman he'd stood up for without asking anything in return, was not just Mara. She was Mara Sullivan, CEO, billionaire, and the most powerful real estate developer in the entire northeastern United States. And she had already made a phone call. Nathan's phone woke him at 6:12 in the morning. He didn't recognize the number, so he let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Different number. He sat up on the couch, still in his dress shirt from the night before, and squinted at the screen. By the time a third call came in, this one from Marcus, his car detailing buddy, he answered it. "Bro," Marcus said, before Nathan could even speak. "Are you seeing this?" "Seeing what? I just woke up." "Get on your phone, not this call, the other thing, the internet. You're everywhere, man." Nathan pulled the phone away from his ear and opened his browser. He typed in his own name out of pure reflex, something he had never done in his life, and what came back made him sit very still for a long moment. There were articles, not blog posts, not random tweets, actual news articles. Local outlets first, but also a couple of national feeds that had picked up the story overnight. Man defends disabled woman outside upscale restaurant. Delivery driver stands up to restaurant owner in viral video. Watch, father and daughter ejected after confronting owner over wheelchair discrimination. The video had over 400,000 views. The comments section was thousands of lines deep. People were tagging friends, sharing it to their own pages, writing paragraph-length responses about their own experiences with discrimination, their own fathers, their own moments of watching someone say something true in a room full of people who decided to stay quiet. "Nathan?" Marcus said. He was still on the line. "Yeah," Nathan said. "I'm here." "You good?" Nathan stared at the screen. Someone had already identified Bissimo by name. Someone else had found Dominic Falcone's photo from the restaurant's own website and posted it alongside a screenshot from the video. The caption read, "This man told a woman in a wheelchair she didn't fit his image. Know his name." "I don't know," Nathan said honestly. He set the phone down on the cushion beside him and sat in the quiet apartment for a moment, listening to the particular silence of a place where a child is still asleep. Down the hall, Sophie's door was cracked open the way she liked it. He could hear the faint sound of her breathing. She had no idea. She'd gone to sleep thinking about cheeseburgers and straight A's, and she had no idea that her father's face was being passed around the internet like a piece of news. He got up, put on coffee, and stood in the kitchen while it brewed, trying to decide how he felt about all of it. The honest answer was that he didn't feel heroic. He felt slightly nauseated, the way you do when something you did in private suddenly becomes public, like someone reading your diary out loud. What he'd said to Dominic the night before had felt necessary in the moment, small and specific, the kind of thing a decent person does because the alternative is to stand there and say nothing. He hadn't done it for applause. He'd done it because Sophie was watching, and because the woman in the wheelchair had a reservation card in her hand and deserved to use it. He poured his coffee and called the delivery company to let them know he'd be late for his morning shift. His supervisor, a tired man named Brett, who had never once expressed an opinion about anything, said, "Hey, is that you on the video? With the restaurant?" "Yeah," Nathan said. Brett was quiet for a second. "Take the morning," he said. "It's slow anyway." By 8 o'clock, Sophie was up and eating cereal at the kitchen table, and Nathan had received 22 phone calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He silenced his phone and put it face down on the counter. He sat across from his daughter and watched her eat. "How'd you sleep?" he asked. "Good." She scraped the bottom of the bowl. "Are we famous?" He blinked. "What?" She looked up at him with an expression that was somehow both innocent and completely knowing. "Jalen texted me this morning. He said his mom showed him a video of you." From last night. He said you were on the news." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. "I'm not on the news." "Jalen's mom said you were." "Jalen's mom watches a lot of things." Sophie put her spoon down. "Dad, are we in trouble?" "No," he said immediately. "No, Bug, we're not in trouble." She studied him. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She picked her spoon back up, ate one more bite, then, "Good, because what you did was right. Jalen's mom thinks so too." He almost said something, decided instead to drink his coffee. The letter arrived that afternoon. Not in the mail, hand-delivered, slipped through the door slot while Nathan was in the back of the apartment helping Sophie with a science worksheet. He heard the soft thud of it hitting the floor and assumed it was a flyer, the kind that advertised pizza or carpet cleaning. He didn't pick it up for 40 minutes. When he finally did, he turned it over and saw the return address printed in clean serif font on the upper left corner of the envelope. Hargrove, Lind and Associates, Legal Counsel. He stood there for a long moment, holding it. He opened it at the kitchen table while Sophie was in her room. He read it twice. Then he read it a third time, more slowly, the way you read something when you're hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something less serious. They didn't. Dominic Falcone was suing him. Not the restaurant, not a public statement. Him. Nathan Cole, private citizen, delivery driver, father of one. The suit alleged defamation, tortious interference with business, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It cited the viral video as evidence that Nathan had publicly made false and damaging statements about Bisimo and its owner. It requested damages in the amount of $250,000. Nathan set the letter down on the table. He looked at it. He looked at his hands. $250,000. He had $47 in his checking account. He had an 11-year-old daughter who didn't know what a subpoena was. He had a delivery job and a dead woman's father's blazer and a second-hand couch. He had, at this moment, no lawyer, no savings, and no earthly idea what to do. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. "I need you to listen to something," Nathan said. He read the letter out loud. When he finished, Marcus was quiet. "That's insane," Marcus said. "Yeah. He's going after you for $250? That's what it says. For saying he discriminated against a woman in a wheelchair. For saying it publicly, apparently." Marcus exhaled long and slow. "Nathan, man, you need a lawyer." "I know I need a lawyer, Marcus. I have $47. "There's legal aid. Pro bono, guys. I can ask around." "I appreciate that," Nathan said. "I genuinely do." He looked at the letter again, at the number, at the word damages. "I'll figure something out." But sitting there with the phone in his hand and the letter on the table, he did not feel like a man who was about to figure something out. He felt like a man who had done the right thing and was about to pay for it in a very specific and very devastating way. He was still sitting there when his phone rang again. Another unknown number, but this one had a New York City area code. He almost didn't answer. He answered on the fourth ring out of something closer to exhaustion than decision. "Mr. Cole?" A woman's voice, professional, measured, not unfamiliar. He straightened slightly without meaning to. "Yes?" "This is Diane Park. I'm calling on behalf of Mara Sullivan. Miss Sullivan would like to speak with you, if you have a moment." Nathan looked at the letter on the table. "Yeah," he said. "I have a moment." Mara's voice came on the line the way she'd shaken his hand the night before. Directly, without preamble, without the soft warm-up that people use when they're about to say something serious. I heard you received correspondence from Falcone's attorneys this morning. Word travels fast, Nathan said. I have sources, she said. I also have attorneys. Better ones. He was quiet. Nathan, her voice shifted slightly, not softer exactly, but more deliberate. I want to help you. I want to offer you legal representation through my firm's counsel. Full coverage. No cost to you. I can't accept that, he said. Why not? Because I don't... He stopped, tried again. I don't know you. And I didn't do what I did last night to get something in return. I know that, she said. That's actually why I want to help. Because you don't operate that way, and Falcone is counting on the fact that most people don't have the resources to fight back. He knows you're a delivery driver. He's done his research. This lawsuit isn't about winning. It's about making the cost of standing up too high for someone in your position. Nathan turned the letter over with one finger. You think so? I know so. He's done it before. There was a restaurant critic in 2019 who wrote a negative review and received a similar letter. She settled out of court for $12,000 and signed an NDA. He's used this playbook at least 3 times that I'm aware of. He finds people who can't afford to fight and makes the process itself the punishment. Nathan absorbed that. How do you know all this? Because I made some calls this morning, Mara said simply. When you care about something, you find out what you're dealing with. He didn't know what to say to that. He looked around the apartment, the worn kitchen table, the science worksheet Sophie had left behind, the blazer hanging over the back of a chair. He thought about his daughter asleep down the hall last night, with no idea what was coming. He thought about what it would mean to fight this and lose. And then he thought about what it would mean to walk away, to settle, to sign a paper that said he was wrong for saying something true. If I accept your help, he said carefully, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this for money. I'm not looking for a payout. I don't want to stand in front of my daughter someday and explain to her that I apologized because it was easier. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Mara spoke again, her voice was different, quieter and more real. My father used a wheelchair, she said, for the last 6 years of his life, and there wasn't a single week that went by where someone didn't look at him the way Dominic Falcone looked at me last night. She paused. I've built a company worth more money than I can meaningfully spend, and I've used some of that to fund accessibility initiatives, to lobby for better legislation, to put my name on things that matter. But I've never once had a stranger step in front of me and say I'm asking what exactly you can't do. Another pause. You didn't do that for a CEO. You did it for a woman who had a reservation. Nathan sat very still. Let me help you, Mara said. Not for the money, not for the publicity. Because what you did mattered, and I don't want Dominic Falcone to win. He looked at the letter one more time, at the number, at the legal language designed to intimidate him into silence. Okay, he said. The legal team moved fast. Within 24 hours of Nathan accepting Mara's offer, 2 attorneys from Sullivan Development Group's outside counsel, a sharp, relentless woman named Carol Briggs, and a quieter, methodical man named James Okafor, had reviewed the lawsuit, spoken with Nathan at length, and begun building a response. They met him at a coffee shop near his apartment, because he didn't have an office, and they treated that fact like it was nothing, because to them, it was nothing. They had seen far more consequential battles begin in far less dignified settings. Carol was the one who did most of the talking. She sat across from Nathan with a yellow legal pad and a pen that never stopped moving, and she explained the situation with the brisk clarity of someone who had no time for softening things unnecessarily. The defamation claim is weak, she said. You made statements that are factually supportable. You said he was discriminating. And he was. The ADA is very clear. Turning away a customer because her wheelchair doesn't fit your image is not a safety policy. It's discrimination. We can build a solid defense on that alone. Good, Nathan said. The tortious interference claim is more creative, she continued without inflection. He'll argue that your statements caused people to avoid the restaurant, costing him business, which, given that the video went viral and Bisimo's Yelp rating has dropped from 4.3 to 2.1 in the last 48 hours, is not entirely false. But the standard for tortious interference requires that your statements be false and malicious. Since they weren't false, they definitely weren't. The claim becomes very difficult to sustain. She looked up from her pad. What I want to understand is whether there are other victims, other people Falcone has done this to, who might be willing to come forward. Because if this is a pattern rather than a single incident, the legal landscape changes significantly. Nathan nodded slowly. Mara mentioned something about a restaurant critic. We're already on that, James said. This was only the second time he'd spoken. He had the demeanor of a man who chose his words like they cost money. We've found 3 potential victims from public records and news databases. There may be more. We're looking. What does this mean for the lawsuit? Nathan asked. It means that what started as Falcone trying to bully a delivery driver into silence might turn into something considerably larger for him, Carol said. She tapped her pen against the pad. Especially if Miss Sullivan chooses to pursue her own actions separately, which I understand she's considering. Nathan looked up. She told me she just wanted to help with my case. She does, James said. She also wants to burn his business to the ground, legally speaking. A small pause. Those 2 things aren't mutually exclusive. Sophie found out about the lawsuit on a Tuesday, 4 days after the letter arrived. Nathan had been careful not to tell her directly. She was 11, and he was her father, and some things weren't her weight to carry. But Sophie had always had a gift for finding the truth in a room, the way some people find a draft. She just followed it until she knew where it was coming from. She came into the kitchen that evening while Nathan was making pasta, and found him rereading something on his phone, with the particular face he made when he was worried, but trying not to show it. "Dad," she said. He looked up. "Hey, Bug, pasta's almost... What's happening?" He set the phone down, looked at her standing there in her socks and her school sweatshirt, chin up the way her mother used to stand when she wanted a straight answer. He had a decision to make in about 3 seconds. "That man from the restaurant," he said. "Falcone. He's suing me." Sophie blinked. "For what?" "For saying what I said. Outside. He claims I damaged his reputation." She processed this. "But you told the truth." "Yes." "So how can he sue you for that?" "Because he has money and lawyers, and he's hoping I'm too scared to fight back." Another beat. Her jaw tightened. "Are you scared?" He looked at his daughter, this fierce, clear-eyed kid who'd gotten straight A's and worn her best dress for a restaurant that wouldn't let them in, who'd stood beside him in a lobby and watched a man be cruel to a stranger and said, "It's not fair." And he shook his head. "No," he said, "I'm not." She came around the counter and leaned against him, the way she used to do when she was smaller. He put his arm around her. They stood like that for a moment, the pasta boiling quietly on the stove. "Mara's helping us," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "Good," Sophie said. "I liked her." He had not told Sophie much about Mara, beyond that she was a businesswoman who had offered to help. He had not told her about the Sullivan Development Group, or the net worth figures that had come up when he'd finally, reluctantly, searched the name. He had not told her that the woman they'd met on the sidewalk was on the Forbes list, that her company had projects in 14 states, that the portfolio across her lap in that restaurant lobby represented more deals than Nathan would complete in 1,000 lifetimes. What he had told Sophie was what seemed true and essential. Mara was someone who'd been treated badly, and she was helping them because Nathan had stood up for her when he didn't have to. Sophie had nodded at that and said, "That makes sense." The way she said it suggested that in her 11-year-old understanding of the world, this was simply how things worked. You do right by someone, they do right by you. The math was obvious. Nathan wished the world worked as clearly as his daughter believed it did. The call with Mara later that week was the longest conversation they'd had so far. It started as a case update. Carol and James were on the line too, walking through the legal strategy. And then it became something else as the attorneys signed off and left Nathan and Mara on the call alone. "How's Sophie?" Mara asked. "She knows about the lawsuit. She took it better than I did." "Kids are resilient," Mara said. Then after a beat, "Or they're scared and they're protecting you. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." Nathan thought about his daughter leaning against him in the kitchen, the way her jaw had tightened. "Yeah," he said. "She's a lot like her mother." "She passed away?" Mara asked. Not prying, just confirming, the way you confirm something you've sensed but haven't heard directly. 3 years ago, Nathan said. Ovarian cancer. Sophie was 8. Mara was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He paused. "She would have handled all of this better than me. She was the kind of person who walked into a room and just knew what to do. You know the type?" "I do," Mara said. Something in her voice was careful, like she was stepping around something she kept in a private place. "What about you?" Nathan asked. "You mentioned your father." "He had MS," she said. "Progressive. He was in a chair for 6 years, and he died 3 years ago. 2 weeks before Christmas." A pause. "He was the one who started the company. I was supposed to be a teacher. That was the plan. And then he got sick, and I stepped in to run things because nobody else was going to. And then I couldn't stop." "Do you wish you had?" She was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. On Sundays. When the phone is quiet and I'm sitting in a restaurant, or trying to, and I think about what he would have ordered." A brief, dry sound that might have been a laugh. He would have loved Bissimo, actually, just to get in there and make the whole room uncomfortable. Nathan laughed at that. It came out genuine, unexpected. "He sounds like someone I would have liked," he said. "Everyone liked him," Mara said. "That was the problem. He was too likable to fight with. So people just watched when things happened to him. Nobody stepped in." A pause. "Nobody like you." The line was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that settles between two people who've said something true and don't feel the need to cover it with noise. "We have something," Mara said finally, her voice shifting back to the register of someone running a strategy. "One of our investigators found a man named Derek Hall. He's a veteran, double amputee, bilateral above the knee. He tried to eat at Bissimo with his family last July. He was turned away. He filed an informal complaint with the city, but Falcone's team got there first, and the complaint was buried." Derek was told the matter had been resolved. It hadn't been. "No," Mara said. "It had been settled. There's a difference. And Derek is angry. Very angry. The kind of angry that's been sitting for 9 months waiting for someone to open the door." She paused. "I think he'll talk." Nathan absorbed that. "Who else?" "There's a woman named Gloria Marsh, 71 years old. Her husband had Parkinson's. Used a walker. They had reservations at Bissimo for their 45th anniversary. They were seated at first, but then the host came back and told them there had been a mistake with the reservation and they'd need to reschedule. They were walked out. The table they'd been sitting at was given to another party before they reached the door. Nathan felt something cold move through him. He waited until they were seated. He waited until they were seated, Mara confirmed. So they couldn't claim they'd been refused entry. He was careful. He's been doing this carefully for years. How many people are we talking about? We don't know yet, Mara said, but James found reference to a pattern in a city building inspection report from 2021. 3 separate accessibility complaints against Bisimo, filed by different individuals within an 18-month period. All 3 were closed. All 3 closure documents have the same signature on them. She paused. We're looking into who signed them. Nathan leaned back in his chair. He thought about Dominic Falcone standing in his restaurant with his hands clasped behind his back, the small private look he'd exchanged with his maitre d', the careful, calibrated pleasantness of a man who'd done this before, a man who'd built a system for it, a man who believed so deeply in his own right to decide who was welcome that he'd refined the process of exclusion into something almost elegant. He's going to try to settle, Nathan said. Almost certainly, Mara said. He'll offer you money, probably soon. It'll come through his attorneys, and it'll sound reasonable, and it'll have an NDA attached. I'm not signing an NDA. I know, she said. I wanted to hear you say it. The call ended a few minutes later. Nathan set the phone on the kitchen table and sat in the quiet apartment. The science worksheet was gone from the table. Sophie had finished it and turned it in. A drawing she'd done in art class was magneted to the refrigerator, a landscape in crayon, a house with yellow windows, and what he assumed was a sun in the upper right corner, even though it looked a little like an explosion. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about Gloria Marsh and her husband, walking out of a restaurant on their 45th anniversary, while their table was given to someone else. He thought about Derek Hull filing a complaint and being told it had been resolved. He thought about all the people who'd taken the settlement, signed the paper, gone home, and told the story at dinner parties for years. You won't believe what happened to us at this restaurant, and never once been able to say it publicly because they'd signed a document that said they couldn't. He thought about Dominic Falcone, right now, in whatever house a man like that lived in, looking at his Yelp reviews and his legal bills and the viral video and calculating, running the numbers the way people like him always ran the numbers, deciding what Nathan Cole was worth, what it would cost to make him go away. Nathan stood up. He went down the hall and looked in on Sophie. She was asleep, with one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress, her hair loose, her mouth slightly open. Peaceful in the specific, absolute way of children who haven't yet learned to be afraid of tomorrow. He went back to the kitchen. He sat down. He picked up his phone and wrote a text to Carol Briggs. When does Derek Hull want to talk? Her response came in under 3 minutes. Tomorrow morning. He's been waiting. Nathan set the phone down. He looked at his daughter's drawing on the refrigerator. The yellow windows. The possible sun. Okay, he thought. Let's do this. Derek Hull showed up to the coffee shop 10 minutes early. Nathan got there 5 minutes early and still found Derek already seated, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, watching the door with the patient stillness of a man trained to wait in uncomfortable places without showing it. He was in his mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, with a close-cropped beard going gray at the jaw. His prosthetic legs were visible below the hem of his jeans. He didn't make any effort to hide them, and he didn't make any effort to draw attention to them either. They were just part of him, the way a scar is part of a person. Present, unremarkable. His. Nathan slid into the seat across from him. Derek. Nathan. He extended a hand across the table. His grip was the kind that meant something. Carol said you wanted to hear it directly. I did, Nathan said. If that's okay. That's why I'm here. Derek set his mug down and looked at Nathan with a directness that wasn't aggressive, just honest. The way some veterans are honest, without the social padding that civilians layer over everything. You want the whole thing or just the part that matters legally? The whole thing, Nathan said, if you're willing. Derek nodded slowly. It was July 9th, a Saturday, my wife's birthday. He said it without ceremony, like reading from a report. But Nathan noticed the slight change in his jaw when he said, my wife's birthday. Our daughter was home from college. First time all three of us had been together since Thanksgiving. Tanya, my wife, she'd been talking about Bissimo for 6 months. Saw it on some list, best restaurants in the city. She made the reservation herself, 2 months ahead. Nathan listened. We get there, Derek continued. The host takes one look at me, not at all of us, just at me, and I can see it. That split second where the face changes and they start calculating. I've seen it 1,000 times. I know what it means. He turned his mug in a slow circle. He seats us anyway, takes us to the back, near the kitchen. Worst table in the place, but we're in. So Tanya's happy, and my daughter's happy. And I decide I'm not going to say anything because it's Tanya's birthday, and I've said something 100 other times at 100 other places, and it never goes anywhere good. He stopped, took a drink of his coffee. Falcone comes over himself, Derek said, maybe 15 minutes after we sit down. He introduces himself, says he likes to welcome guests personally. Very smooth, very polished. He shakes my hand. He compliments Tanya. He says something to my daughter about her earrings. And then he looks at me and says, and I want to be exact here, because I've said these words to myself probably 1,000 times since. He says, Sir, I notice you may need some assistance navigating our space. For your own comfort, I want to be upfront that our layout can be challenging. We want to ensure you have the best possible experience, and I wonder if you'd be more comfortable returning on a less busy evening when we can give you more personal attention. The coffee shop hummed around them. Someone 2 tables over was on a laptop. The espresso machine hissed. A less busy evening, Nathan said. A less busy evening, Derek repeated. It was 2 in the afternoon. There were 4 other tables in the whole place. He set his jaw. Tanya got very quiet. My daughter started to say something, and Tanya put her hand on her arm, and I looked at Falcone, and I thought about all the times I'd said something, and all the times it hadn't mattered. And I thought about Tanya's face, and my daughter's face, and I made the wrong call. What did you do? I said, we'll leave. He said it flat, without softening it. I said we'd leave, and I stood up, and we walked out. And Tanya didn't say anything the whole drive home, and my daughter cried in the back seat. And I filed a complaint with the city the next Monday, because it was the only thing I could think of that felt like doing something. He looked at his hands. And then a man from the city called me 3 weeks later and told me the matter had been looked into and appropriately addressed, and I should receive a letter confirming resolution. He looked up at Nathan. I never got the letter, and I never pushed it, because I was tired. Because I'd been tired for a long time. Nathan didn't say anything for a moment. He thought about Tanya going quiet in the restaurant. He thought about the daughter crying in the back seat. He thought about Derek filing the complaint on a Monday morning. The act of a man who didn't have any better options, but needed to do something. You're not tired now, Nathan said. Derek looked at him steadily. No, he said. I'm not. Gloria Marsh called that same afternoon. She had gotten Nathan's number through Carol, and she called at 2:15 on a Wednesday, while Nathan was between delivery routes, sitting in his car with the engine running for the heat. Her voice was the voice of a woman in her 70s, who had taught school for 30 years and still spoke to adults the way she'd spoken to students. Clearly, directly, with an expectation of being understood. "I saw the video," she said, after she'd established who she was. "I watched it 4 times. Mrs. Marsh." "Gloria, please. I'm too old for Mrs. Marsh." A brief pause. "My husband passed in February, 6 months after they walked us out of that restaurant." Nathan was quiet. "I want you to understand what that evening was," Gloria said. "Bernard, my husband, he was not a man who complained. 45 years of marriage, and the only time I ever heard him complain about his Parkinson's was once. The night before our oldest son's wedding, when his hands were shaking too badly to tie his own tie. He sat on the edge of the bed and he said, 'Gloria, I hate this.' That was it. One sentence in 45 years. She paused. We had been looking forward to that anniversary dinner for months. He'd read about the restaurant in the paper. He said, "That's where we're going, Glo. No arguments." He wore his good suit. Nathan stared through the windshield. "They sat us near the window," Gloria continued, "which was lovely. Bernard ordered wine, just 1 glass because of his medication, but he ordered it himself, and he was pleased about it. And then the host came back, a young man, very apologetic, very smooth. He said there had been an error with our reservation, that the table had been double booked, and he was terribly sorry, but they'd need to accommodate the other party. He said he could reschedule us for the following week." "And you left," Nathan said. "And we left," Gloria said. "And I watched the other party get seated at our table before we reached the door. A couple, young, no mobility aids, no walkers. They didn't look like a double booking. They looked like what they were." She paused. "Bernard didn't say anything. He walked to the car, and he held my door open, and he drove us home. And that night at dinner, I'd made pasta, nothing special. He said, 'I just wanted to take you somewhere nice, Glo.' And that was all he said about it." "Did you file a complaint?" Nathan asked. "I called the restaurant the next day," Gloria said. "The manager, not Falcone himself, told me he would look into it and get back to me. He never did. I called once more. Same answer. I wrote a letter to the city's accessibility office. I received a form response. And then Bernard got worse, and we had other things to worry about. And then he passed, and..." She stopped. "I am 71 years old, and I have been patient my entire life, because that is what my generation was taught. Be patient. Be polite. Don't make trouble." A pause. "I am done being patient." "Gloria," Nathan said, "I'm glad you called." "I imagine you are," she said, with a dry practicality that he liked immediately. "Now, tell me what you need me to do." The settlement offer came on a Thursday morning. Nathan was in the middle of his delivery route when Carol called. He pulled over in a parking lot between a dry cleaner and a dollar store and sat with the phone against his ear while Carol laid it out in her efficient way. $80,000, she said. Full release of all claims. Non-disparagement agreement, NDA, covering the events of October 14th and all related legal proceedings. Nathan looked at the parking lot. A woman was loading bags into her trunk. A kid was eating something outside the dollar store. $80,000 was more money than Nathan had made in the last 2 years combined. It would pay off his debt. It would cover Sophie's next 4 years of school supplies and activities, and maybe, at the edges, start something that resembled a savings account. It would mean no more courtrooms, no more depositions, no more lawyers, even Mara's lawyers, and no more of this grinding anxiety that had been living between his shoulder blades for the past 2 weeks. He thought about all of that very clearly and completely. He let himself think about it. He didn't rush past it or pretend he didn't feel the pull of it. Then he said, "No." Carol was quiet for a beat. "I want to make sure you understand the full picture." "I understand it," Nathan said. $80,000, and I sign a paper saying I won't talk about what he does, while he keeps doing it." He paused. "What happens to Derek, to Gloria? If I take this deal, and they can't point to my case as the starting point, does their legal position weaken?" "Potentially," Carol said. "You're the most visible victim, the one with the viral video. The others are stronger with you in the case than without." "Then no," Nathan said. "Tell them no." Another pause. "Nathan, I want to be clear. This number may not go up. It may go down. It may disappear entirely if Falcone decides to go to trial." "I know." "And you're prepared for that?" "I'm prepared for that." He heard Carol make a small sound. Not quite approval, not quite concern. Something in between. "Okay," she said. "I'll convey your response." He pulled back into traffic. He finished his route. He picked up Sophie from her after-school program, and they drove home. And she told him about a fight 2 girls in her class had gotten into over a borrowed jacket, narrating the whole thing with the detailed investment of someone who had observed every angle of the conflict and had strong opinions about the outcome. He didn't tell her about the settlement. She was 11. She was entitled to care about the jacket. The press conference was Mara's idea. Nathan heard about it 2 days after he rejected the settlement, when Mara called him on a Sunday morning, earlier than she usually called, which told him something. She had a particular timing to her calls. Late mornings on weekdays, evenings if it was strategy, Sunday mid-morning, only when she'd been thinking about something since the previous night and had decided to stop waiting. "I think we need to go public," she said. "Not just the video, not just the social media. An actual statement, in front of cameras, with Derek and Gloria and you, addressing what Falcone has done as a pattern rather than an incident." "You want us to stand up in front of reporters?" Nathan said. "Yes. Me specifically." "You specifically," Mara said. "Because you're the one people have a face for. The video. People see you and they see someone who looks like them. A regular person. Not an attorney, not a CEO. Someone who just said something true." "You'd be there too?" "Yes, but I want to be honest with you. When I'm in the frame, the story changes slightly. It becomes about Sullivan Development Group, about money, about a powerful woman using her resources, which matters, but it also pulls focus." She paused. "The story needs to stay about Derek and Gloria and what Falcone did to them. About the pattern. I don't want my net worth to be the headline." Nathan considered that. It was, he was beginning to understand, one of the things about Mara that he found consistently surprising. The self-awareness about how she landed in a room. Most people with her level of wealth had lost that awareness years ago, or had never had it. She carried it deliberately, like a tool she'd taught herself to use carefully. "When?" he asked. "Tuesday," she said. "James found the signature on those city building inspection closures. It belongs to a deputy director in the Accessibility Compliance Office. A man named Roy Sutter. We've been doing some additional research on Mr. Sutter's relationship with Falcone, and it appears they have a history that the city might find very interesting." "What kind of history?" "The financial kind," Mara said. "Roy Sutter's brother-in-law owns a company that has received catering contracts from Bissimo for the past 4 years. Total value approximately $60,000. And Roy Sutter is the person who signed off on the closure of 3 separate accessibility complaints against the restaurant during that same period." Nathan was quiet for a moment. He was burying the complaints. Allegedly, Mara said, with the precise diction of a woman who had attorneys. But the timeline is very compelling. And the state attorney general's office apparently agrees, because they've received our documentation and have opened a preliminary inquiry. You sent it to the attorney general? James did, Mara said. Friday afternoon. We received confirmation of receipt Saturday morning. She paused. Falcone doesn't know that yet. Nathan sat with that for a moment. 2 weeks ago, he had been a delivery driver with $47 trying to get his daughter into a restaurant. Now there was a state inquiry, a press conference, a veteran and a 71-year-old widow, and a paper trail connecting a restaurant owner to a corrupt city official. The thing had grown, the way things do when you start pulling at a thread that's connected to other threads. Are you sure about Tuesday? He asked. I'm sure, Mara said. Falcone's attorneys filed a motion Monday to have the lawsuit expedited. They want this over before more victims come forward. We need to make sure the opposite happens. Okay, Nathan said. Tuesday. A pause. Then, softer. How are you holding up? It was the kind of question that could be answered with a word. Fine. Okay. Managing. And he knew it, and she knew it. He chose not to use any of those words. I keep thinking about Sophie, he said. What I'm modeling for her. Whether this is the right kind of thing to show a kid. What do you mean? I mean, I don't want her to think the world works like this. That you stand up for someone and suddenly there's a lawsuit and a press conference and a state inquiry and everything gets complicated and expensive and terrifying. Because it does. It does work like that. And I want her to still be the person who says, that's not fair, when she sees something wrong. Mara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. Can I tell you something? Yeah? When I was 9 years old, my father took me to a hardware store to buy a lock for my bicycle. The man at the counter ignored us for about 10 minutes while he helped other customers who came after us. My father was in his chair, and I didn't understand then exactly what was happening. I just felt it, the way kids feel unfairness before they can name it. And finally my dad said, in a perfectly normal conversational voice, "Excuse me, we've been waiting." And the man at the counter looked at him and said, "I'll get to you." And my father said, "You're getting to me now." She paused. We got the lock. The man was sullen and rude about it. And on the drive home, I asked my dad if he was upset. And he said, I was upset for about 30 seconds. Then I decided it wasn't worth more than 30 seconds. Nathan listened. Your daughter is going to remember October 14th for the rest of her life, Mara said. She's going to remember that her father saw something wrong and said something true. The lawsuit, the press conference, she might not fully understand all of that. But she will understand. My dad didn't walk away. He didn't say anything for a moment. He was in the kitchen again, the way he always seemed to end up when the important conversations happened. Standing at the counter, looking at Sophie's drawing on the refrigerator. The yellow windows, the possible sun. Thank you, he said. For what? For saying things that are true. She laughed at that, a real laugh, brief and quiet. I'm also going to send over your prep notes for Tuesday, she said. Because the truth is easier when you've thought about how you want to say it. The press conference was held outside the steps of City Hall, which was Mara's choice. She wanted the building in the frame, wanted the institutional backdrop, wanted anyone watching to understand that this was not a personal dispute between a delivery driver and a restaurant owner. This was a matter of public record, public policy, and public accountability. Nathan wore his own blazer this time, not his father-in-law's, his, the one he'd bought 3 years ago for a job interview and never gotten much use out of since. It fit better. He stood at a small podium with Carol to his left and James to his right. and behind him stood Derek Hall and Gloria Marsh, and off to the side, slightly back, stood Mara, visible but not central, present but not dominant. There were more cameras than he'd expected. Local news, 2 regional affiliates, a freelance journalist from a national outlet who'd reached out to Carol after the video went viral. People have gathered on the steps, some of them apparently there by coincidence, some of them clearly not. Nathan looked down at his notes. Then he looked up at the cameras. He thought about what Mara had told him on Sunday. He thought about Sophie, who was in school right now and had absolutely no idea this was happening, which was intentional. She'd see it on the news later, and he'd rather explain it after the fact than have her watch it live and be anxious. He thought about Dominic Falcone, who had looked at him in a restaurant lobby 2 weeks ago and decided, based on his blazer and his shoes and his job, that he was nobody worth worrying about. He set his notes down. "I'm Nathan Cole," he said. "I'm a delivery driver and a single father. On October 14th, I took my daughter to a restaurant to celebrate something she'd worked very hard for. We were turned away. But before we were turned away, I watched the owner of that restaurant look at a woman in a wheelchair and tell her, in different words, that the way she moved through the world was incompatible with his image. I said something about it. I said it was discrimination. And then he sued me." He paused. "For $250,000. Because I said something true." He glanced back at Derek and Gloria. They both looked back at him with steadiness, the kind that comes from having waited a long time to stand somewhere and be counted. "2 weeks ago, I didn't know Derek Hall," he said. "I didn't know Gloria Marsh. I didn't know that Dominic Falcone had turned away a disabled combat veteran on his wife's birthday. I didn't know that he'd walked an elderly couple out of his restaurant on their 45th wedding anniversary. I didn't know that 3 separate complaints had been filed with the city's accessibility office and buried by a city official who had a financial relationship with Falcone's business." He looked at the cameras. "I know all of that now, and so do you." The questions from the reporters came fast after that, and Nathan answered them the way Carol had coached him, directly, without speculating, without saying anything that wasn't already on the public record. Derek spoke briefly, his voice flat and deliberate, the voice of a man who had rehearsed nothing because he didn't need to. Gloria spoke last, and when she said Bernard's name, just his name, in the middle of a sentence, Nathan saw 2 of the reporters stop writing and just listen. Mara did not speak at the podium. When a reporter called out her name and asked for a comment, she said only, "I'm here to support the people standing behind Mr. Cole. They're the ones who have something to say." It was exactly the right thing to say, and Nathan suspected she had known it would be. Dominic Falcone watched the press conference on a laptop in the back office of his restaurant. This was something Nathan would learn later, from an account in the newspaper. A small detail included almost in passing, but one that lodged in his mind with particular clarity. Dominic, watching alone. The restaurant dark around him in the afternoon. The dining room empty, the gold lanterns unlit. His attorney called him before the press conference was over. "How bad is this?" Dominic asked. His attorney, a careful man who chose his words precisely, said, "The state inquiry is real. Roy Sutter has already retained his own counsel, which means he's going to be looking to limit his own exposure, which means—" "He'll talk," Dominic said. "He'll cooperate," his attorney said. "There's a difference. But yes, he will tell them what they want to know." Dominic closed the laptop. The office was quiet. He had built this restaurant over 20 years. The menu, the aesthetic, the reputation, the particular atmosphere that he had decided long ago meant something. He had made choices in the service of that atmosphere. Choices he had told himself were about experience, about quality, about the careful curation of something excellent. He had told himself that so many times, in so many ways, that he had stopped being aware it was a story. Now there was a delivery driver standing on the steps of City Hall, saying it out loud in terms that could not be recurated. And behind the delivery driver stood a veteran and a widow and Mara Sullivan, whose company had just, Dominic's assistant had informed him that morning, purchased the building that housed 3 of Dominic's other restaurant investments as part of a broader real estate acquisition. He had not known she was the one buying those buildings when he'd turned her away. He knew it now. "What are my options?" he asked his attorney. The attorney was quiet for a moment. "Fewer than last week," he said. Dominic sat in the dark office for a long time after the call ended. The restaurant around him was quiet in the particular way of a place that should have been full. It was 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. His reservations for the evening had dropped by 60% in the 2 weeks since the video. His chef had already asked, carefully, about job security. 2 of his waitstaff had quit without notice. The Yelp rating, that stupid number he had once dismissed as the opinion of people who didn't understand what he was trying to do, sat at 2.1 and showed no sign of moving. He thought about Nathan Cole, in his resoled shoes and his outdated blazer, standing in his lobby asking a simple question. He thought, I should have just let her in. But even thinking it, he knew it wasn't true. He wouldn't have. He would have made the same calculation, done the same private exchange with his maitre d', sent the same polished signal of dismissal, because that was who he was, and the video hadn't changed that. The video had only changed what was visible. What he did not know, sitting alone in his dark restaurant at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday, was that it was about to get significantly more visible. Because that morning, before the press conference began, Carol Briggs had received a message from a woman named Patricia Wynn, who had dined at Bissimo in 2022 and had a story. And a woman named James Rourke. He had the wrong name in the initial filing, a clerical error, had also reached out. And behind him was another person, and then another. The door had been opened. And doors, once opened by people like Derek Hall and Gloria Marsh and a delivery driver in a blazer, have a way of staying open. Nathan didn't know any of that yet. He was standing on the steps of City Hall with the press conference winding down, and Sophie was in school, and the sun was out for the first time in a week. And beside him, slightly back, just off his right shoulder, Mara Sullivan was watching the cameras pack up with an expression that he couldn't quite read. He turned to look at her. She looked back at him. "How do you feel?" she asked. He thought about it. He thought about $47 and a reservation and a woman in a wheelchair with her hands folded and a little girl whispering, "The best dad in the whole world." "Like I'm just getting started," he said. Mara nodded, a small, real nod. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." The calls started the morning after the press conference. Not media calls. Carol handled those. These were different. Private individuals, people who'd seen the video or read the coverage and recognized something in it, something that matched a memory they'd been carrying without knowing what to do with. They came through Carol's office line, through a tip form James had set up, through a Facebook group that someone had created, called Bissimo Victims, that had, within 48 hours of the press conference, accumulated 230 members. Most of them had stories that followed the same shape: a reservation, a moment of arriving and being assessed, the smooth, practiced language of exclusion delivered by Dominic or his staff. Never crude, never explicit, always wrapped in the vocabulary of concern. For your comfort, for your safety, given our layout. The particular refinement of a man who had learned to discriminate in a way that left no fingerprints, that could be reframed as consideration. that made the victim feel almost ungrateful for objecting. And then the departure, the ride home, the silence. Nathan read the summaries Carol sent him each evening. He read them at the kitchen table after Sophie went to bed, a cup of coffee going cold beside him. Each one landed differently. A man named Paul Yeager, 43, spinal cord injury, turned away twice. He'd actually gone back a second time to make sure the first hadn't been a misunderstanding. A woman named Ruth Chen, 68, recovering from a hip replacement, still using a cane, told by the host that the restaurant strongly recommended she reschedule for when she was more mobile. An 80-year-old retired school principal named Horace Webb, who used a power wheelchair, who had been told, not suggested, that the restaurant could not accommodate motorized chairs due to fire code, which was a lie so specific and so confident that it had silenced Horace completely. Because who argues with a fire code they can't immediately look up? Nathan read about Horace Webb and sat very still for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Mara. She answered on the second ring. It was 10:40 at night. She sounded like she was still working. "Did you see the Horace Webb summary?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "He believed it," Nathan said. "The fire code thing. He went home and he looked it up later and he found out it wasn't true, and he still didn't do anything about it. Because by then he felt embarrassed for believing it in the first place." "I know," Mara said. Her voice had the particular quiet of someone who has felt the specific thing you're describing. "That's deliberate," Nathan said. "That's not just arrogance. That's calculated. He built a lie specific enough that people would be too embarrassed to challenge it, and then they carry that embarrassment instead of the anger." "Yes," Mara said. "That's exactly what it is." Nathan pushed the summaries away from him slightly. "How many are we at?" 11 confirmed with documentation. 7 more pending. Carol thinks we'll have 15 to 18 by the end of the week." 15 to 18 people. 15 to 18 evenings that had gone wrong in the specific, quiet, humiliating way that Dominic Falcone had perfected. 15 to 18 car rides home in silence. "I want to talk to Horace," Nathan said. "Carol already reached out," Mara said. He said yes. He said, and I want to give you this exactly because Carol wrote it down. He said, "I've been waiting for someone to ask." Horace Webb met Nathan at a diner near his apartment building on a Thursday afternoon. He was a large man who had become slightly smaller with age, the way very big men sometimes do, carrying the memory of the size they used to be in the width of their shoulders and the steadiness of their hands. His power wheelchair was immaculate. He wore a dress shirt and a tie, which Nathan suspected was not accidental. This was a man who had dressed for school every day for 30 years and did not appear to have stopped. "I read about you," Horace said as soon as Nathan sat down. "Before all this, I mean. I saw the video the week it came out. My granddaughter showed me." He studied Nathan with the appraising look of a former principal. The look of a man who had spent decades determining, quickly and accurately, whether a person in front of him was being straight with him. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "In the video. Some people, you can see them deciding. You didn't decide. You just spoke." "I didn't really think about it," Nathan admitted. "That's character," Horace said simply. "Decision is strategy. Not thinking about it is character." Nathan absorbed that. He thought it was probably the most precise thing anyone had said to him in the past 3 weeks. "Tell me what happened," Nathan said. Horace straightened slightly, the instinctive posture of a man preparing to give an account. "August of last year. I had taken my wife, Edna, for our anniversary. 49 years. He said the number with quiet pride. We wanted somewhere special. Edna had read about Bissimo. I made the reservation, called ahead as I always do, Inform them I use a power chair. Ask specifically about accessibility. The woman I spoke with said it would not be a problem. And when you arrived? The host greeted us normally, took us inside. We were perhaps halfway across the dining room when the manager, not Falcone himself, a younger man, intercepted us. He said he needed to speak with me about a concern. He pulled me aside, away from Edna, which I found immediately strange and inappropriate. And then he told me about the fire code. What exactly did he say? He said that their fire marshal had recently conducted an inspection and had determined that motorized wheelchairs in the dining area presented an obstruction risk in the event of an emergency evacuation. He said this was a municipal regulation and not within the restaurant's control. He said he hoped I understood, and he said it with great seriousness and great apparent regret. The way a man says something false when he's rehearsed the regret very carefully. Nathan looked at his hands on the table. "And you left?" "I left," Horace said, "because in the moment it was specific. Fire code, fire marshal, inspection. I am an educated man, Mr. Cole. I ran a school for 22 years. I know how institutional language sounds, and it sounded right. It sounded like a fact." He paused. "Later that night I looked it up. There is no such municipal regulation. There never was." And by then, Edna had been quiet all through dinner at a different restaurant, a lesser one, and she had not said a single word about Bissimo or about what had happened. Because Edna is a woman who has lived 71 years knowing that sometimes people do things to you, and there is no remedy. "But you looked it up," Nathan said. "You looked it up because you knew." "I looked it up," Horace confirmed, "because the specific embarrassment of having believed something false is worse than the embarrassment of having been lied to. I wanted to know which one it was." He was quiet for a moment. "It was the second one, and I filed the complaint. And then the complaint disappeared, and I had the embarrassment of all three things: being lied to, having believed it, and then having complained about it to no effect." He looked at Nathan directly. "Do you understand what that accumulation does to a person?" "Yes," Nathan said. "I think I'm beginning to." "Good," Horace said. "Then use it." The second settlement offer arrived the following Monday. Carol called Nathan during his lunch break. He was parked outside a sandwich shop, eating in the car the way he always did between routes, and he listened to her lay it out with the particular calm she brought to all financial information, the way a doctor delivers numbers, clearly, without performing any emotion about them. 120,000, Carol said. Same structure. Full release, non-disparagement, NDA. But this time, there's an additional clause. The offer extends to Derek Hall and Gloria Marsh, contingent on all three of you signing simultaneously. Nathan stopped chewing. He's trying to buy all three of us at once. At a discount, Carol said. Individually, each of those claims is potentially worth more. Bundled together with an NDA, it's cleaner for him. 1 transaction, 3 silences. Did Derek and Gloria see it? I spoke with both of them this morning, Carol said. Gloria's response was, and I'm quoting her exactly, "Tell that man I'm 71 years old and I have nothing left to be afraid of." Derek's response was shorter and not something I'll repeat verbatim, but the substance was a firm no. Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. Then my answer is the same. Nathan, Carol's voice shifted slightly, not softer, but more deliberate, the way she got when she was about to say something she needed him to actually hear. I want you to understand where we are. The state inquiry is real, and it's moving. But these things move slowly. Falcone's attorneys are good. They're going to contest the ADA claims on technical grounds. They have an argument about the specific configuration of the dining room that isn't entirely without merit. This is not a guaranteed win. I know, Nathan said. $120,000 is not nothing. I know that too, Nathan said. I'm extremely aware of what $120,000 is. He paused. I'm also aware of what Horace Webb's face looked like when he told me he'd believe the fire code story. That's not nothing either. Carol was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. I'll convey the response. He finished his sandwich. He drove his next route. At 4 o'clock, he picked up Sophie, and she told him about a science project she wanted to do, about migratory birds. And he asked her questions about it all the way home, and by the time they got to the apartment, he'd completely forgotten about the settlement. In the way that your children sometimes bring you back to the only thing that actually matters. The investigation broke open on a Wednesday. Nathan heard about it from Mara, who called him at 7 in the morning, earlier than she'd ever called, which told him, before she said a word, that something had shifted. Her voice had a controlled urgency in it, the voice of someone moving through a situation that had accelerated beyond its original speed. Roy Sutter gave his statement to the AG's office yesterday, she said. James got a partial summary this morning through a contact. And, Nathan said, he was standing in the kitchen in his socks, coffee untouched. He confirmed that he closed the 3 complaints on Falcone's restaurant in exchange for the catering contracts to his brother-in-law's company. He has documentation, emails, bank records, a text message chain with Falcone's operations manager that is, apparently, remarkably specific about the arrangement. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. He kept receipts. He kept everything, Mara said, which suggests that either he's been planning to use it for leverage someday, or he's simply a disorganized criminal, or, and Carol thinks this is most likely, he always suspected this day would come, and he wanted to be the one who cooperated first. What does this mean for Falcone? The AG's office is now looking at potential criminal charges, Mara said. Bribery of a public official. Obstruction of civil rights complaints. They've also referred the matter to the State Human Rights Division, which has independent authority to pursue the ADA violations separately from our civil case. She paused. Dominic Falcone is no longer just being sued by a delivery driver. He's being investigated by the state. Nathan sat down at the kitchen table. He didn't remember deciding to sit down. His legs just found the chair. When does this become public? He asked. It already is, Mara said. The AG's office confirmed the inquiry to a reporter from the Tribune at 6 this morning. It'll be in the news cycle by 9. He looked at the table, at the cold coffee, at the space where Sophie's cereal bowl had been 20 minutes ago before she'd headed down the hall to brush her teeth. He thought about Dominic Falcone watching the press conference on his laptop in a dark restaurant. He thought about the careful system, the scripted language, the buried complaints, the fire code lie, the polished regrets that Dominic had built and maintained and believed was invisible. Mara, he said. Yeah? Did you know this was where it was going? When you offered to help me, did you know it would get here? A pause. Not the pause of someone deciding whether to be honest. The pause of someone deciding how to be honest, accurately. I knew there was a pattern, she said. I knew he'd done this before. I didn't know about Sutter specifically until James found the signatures. But yes, I believed that if we started pulling the thread, there was more there. Another pause. I want to be straight with you about something. Okay. When I made those calls the morning after we met, when I said I had sources, I had attorneys, part of that was because I wanted to help you. A real part. What you did mattered, and I meant that. Her voice was careful. But part of it was also because Dominic Falcone has been doing this to people for years, and I knew his type. And I knew that a viral video and a delivery driver with no resources was exactly the kind of thing that disappears in 2 weeks if nobody gives it weight. So I gave it weight. Both things are true simultaneously. Nathan looked at the window. The morning light was coming through in that flat, honest way it did in autumn. The light that doesn't flatter anything, but makes everything visible. "I appreciate you telling me that," he said. "I didn't want you to find out later and feel like I'd used you," she said. "Because I haven't. But I also wasn't purely altruistic, and you deserve to know the difference." "Mara," he thought about how to say this. "What you described, knowing someone is getting away with something, knowing you have the tools to stop it, using the situation that presents itself to do that. That's not using someone. That's just being smart about doing the right thing." He paused. "My wife used to say that people who wait for the purely perfect reason to do something good never do anything." The line was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like she was remarkable," Mara said. "She was," Nathan said. "She really was." Sophie found out about the state investigation from her friend Jalen, which meant she found out approximately 4 hours after it became news, which was faster than Nathan had hoped for, and exactly as fast as he should have expected. She came home from school with a particular look on her face. Not upset, not frightened, the same look she'd had the morning she'd asked if they were famous. The look of a child who has processed something and is bringing it to you not for reassurance, but for confirmation. "They're investigating him," she said, dropping her backpack by the door. "Falcone. The government is investigating him." "Yes," Nathan said, "because of what he did to the other people, not just us." "Yes." She sat down on the couch and pulled her knees up and looked at him with those eyes that were so much like her mother's it sometimes stopped his breathing. "Did you know this was going to happen?" "Not exactly," he said. "I knew Mara's team was looking into things. I didn't know it would go this far." "But you kept going anyway," she said, "even when you didn't know." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always."
Are you and Mara, are you friends?"
Nathan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Yes," he said. "I think so. Why?" Sophie tilted her head slightly in the manner of someone conducting a very careful investigation. "Because you talk to her like you talk to Mom," she said. "Like you're thinking before you say things. You don't think before you say things to most people." He looked at his daughter, at her serious, perceptive 11-year-old face, at the fact that she had just said something that he himself hadn't fully acknowledged yet. That's a very observant thing to notice," he said. "I'm observant," Sophie said, in a tone that suggested this was not new information. She unfolded her legs and stood up. "I like her," she said, "just so you know." She picked up her backpack. "What's for dinner?" "Pasta," Nathan said. "You always make pasta when you're thinking about something." She went down the hall. He stood in the living room for a moment, feeling the quiet that she left behind. The Sophie-shaped space in a room when she exited it. He thought about what she'd said. He thought about Mara on the phone that morning, saying, "I didn't want you to find out later." Thought about the specific care of that. The choice to be straight with him, even when the easier thing would have been to let him keep a simpler version of the story. He went to the kitchen and put water on for the pasta. Dominic Falcone gave an interview on Thursday evening. Nathan watched it on his phone after Sophie was asleep, sitting on the couch in the dark, the way he had the night the video went viral. A strange symmetry. 3 weeks later, the same couch, the same quiet apartment. A different kind of news on the screen. Dominic had chosen a local television station, a friendly anchor, a setting designed to convey normalcy. His office, a bookcase behind him, good lighting. He wore a dark suit and the expression of a man performing contrition while simultaneously auditioning for the role of victim. He spoke about his 20 years building Bissimo. He spoke about his love of the community. He said the word accessibility 4 times in 5 minutes, in the way people say a word repeatedly when they have recently learned they were supposed to have been saying it all along. "I want to be clear," Dominic said to the anchor, "that I deeply regret any experience that fell short of the welcome every guest deserves. If anyone felt turned away, that was never my intention. Bissimo has always been a place for everyone." The anchor asked about Roy Sutter and the state investigation. Dominic's composure shifted by approximately 2 millimeters. Enough to see, not enough for him to know you could see it. "I have every confidence that the investigators will find that Bissimo operated fully within the law," he said. "Any suggestion of impropriety is simply not consistent with how I have run this business." The anchor asked about Nathan Cole. Dominic looked at his hands briefly. "Mr. Cole is entitled to his perspective," he said. "I have great respect for a father who wants to stand up for his daughter. I simply disagree with his characterization of events." Nathan turned the phone off. He sat in the dark and thought about the word characterization, about the way it reframed a true thing as a subjective thing, a narrative thing, a matter of perspective rather than fact. He thought about Horace Webb pulling up fire code regulations on his computer at 11 o'clock at night while his wife slept, checking whether he'd been lied to. He thought about Derek Hull saying, "I made the wrong call about leaving without saying anything on his wife's birthday," carrying that like it was his failure rather than what it actually was. The rational response of a man who had been worn down by 100 smaller versions of the same thing. He thought about what Dominic had just called it. Characterization. He picked up his phone again and sent a text to Carol. "Did you see the interview?" She responded in under a minute, as she always did. "Yes, his attorneys advised him to do it. It was a mistake." He wrote back, "Why?" She wrote, "Because he said, if anyone felt turned away, not, I turned people away. If anyone felt." The AG's office has documentation. Feelings don't create documentation. Facts create documentation. He just told 12 camera people that this is a matter of feelings. Nathan read that twice. Then he wrote, "Good." Carol sent back a single word. "Indeed." The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the time between the interview and the hearing, several things happened in the layered, overlapping way that legal and public processes happen. Not cleanly, not in sequence, but simultaneously and at different speeds. The State Human Rights Division filed its own separate action against Bissimo, citing 6 specific violations of the ADA across a 4-year period. Roy Sutter was placed on administrative leave pending the bribery investigation, and 2 other city officials were identified as having knowledge of his arrangement with Falcone. A reporter from a national newspaper published a long-form piece about the case that interviewed 7 of the victims by name, with photographs. Horace Webb in his dress shirt and tie, Gloria Marsh with a photograph of Bernard on the table in front of her, Derek Hull at a kitchen table with his hands folded in a way that looked remarkably similar to how Mara had sat in that restaurant lobby. The piece was titled, "The Velvet Rope: How One Restaurant Built a System of Legal Discrimination." It was read by a lot of people. It was read, Nathan knew, by people who recognized the system described in it. Not just from Bissimo, but from other restaurants, other hotels, other spaces where the velvet rope was invisible, but the exclusion was real. He received messages from people across the country who had their own Bissimos, their own Dominics, their own Tuesday night car rides home in silence. He couldn't respond to all of them. He responded to as many as he could, late at night, between routes, in the parking lot of the dollar store, on his phone with a cracked corner that he'd been meaning to get fixed for 6 months. Sophie came into the living room one evening and found him there, phone in hand, reading. and she sat down beside him without asking what he was doing. "People are writing to you," she said, not a question. "Yeah, what do they say?" "That the same thing happened to them," Nathan said. "In different places, different people, but the same basic thing." Sophie was quiet. She looked at his phone screen. He tilted it so she could see, and she read in silence for a moment. Then she said, "Does it make you sad?" He thought about that honestly. "Yes," he said. "And also something else. Not happy exactly. More like, I don't know, like when you're carrying something heavy for a long time and someone else picks up one end." Sophie thought about that. "Like when I help you bring in the groceries." "Exactly like that," he said. She leaned against him the way she'd been leaning against him since she was small enough to fit under his arm completely. He put the phone down, and they sat in the quiet apartment for a while, not watching anything, not talking, just being in the same space the way families do when they've run out of words, but not out of comfort. Mara came to the city 2 days before the hearing. She didn't announce it in advance. She mentioned it almost incidentally in a call with Nathan, in the way she sometimes mentions significant things, as if they were logistical details. "I'll be in town Thursday to prep with Carol," she said. "James thinks I should be present for the opening arguments." "Are you testifying?" Nathan asked. "Possibly, depending on how the morning goes." A pause. "I was also thinking, if you and Sophie were free Thursday evening, there's a restaurant I'd like to try. Nothing special. Burgers, actually. Sophie mentioned she liked burgers." Nathan stopped walking mid-stride. He was on his afternoon route, standing on someone's front porch with a package in his arms. "When did you talk to Sophie?" "Last Tuesday. She called Carol's office to ask a question about the case, and Carol put her through to me by accident. We ended up talking for about 20 minutes. Another pause. "I hope that's okay." What did she ask about the case? She wanted to know if Horace Webb's wife had been upset about the anniversary dinner, Mara said. Specifically about that. Nathan looked at the porch in front of him, at the doormat that said, "Welcome." "What did you tell her?" "I told her yes, and she said, that's the worst part, when it hurts someone you love more than it hurts you." And then she told me about her mother. Nathan didn't say anything for a moment. He set the package down carefully and stood on the welcome mat in the late afternoon light. He thought about his daughter, 11 years old, calling a legal office to ask about a 71-year-old woman's feelings, and ending up talking about her mother. "She's extraordinary," Mara said quietly. "Yeah," Nathan said. His voice came out thicker than he intended. "She really is." "Thursday evening," Mara said. "Burgers. Is that a yes?" He cleared his throat. "That's a yes." "Good," she said, and he could hear in her voice, beneath the precision, beneath the competence, beneath the controlled urgency of a woman who ran 14 states' worth of real estate, something uncomplicated and genuine. The sound of someone looking forward to a specific evening, a specific table, a specific conversation. Nathan picked the package back up. He rang the doorbell. He finished his route. That night at the kitchen table, he told Sophie they were having dinner with Mara on Thursday. Sophie looked up from her homework. She held perfectly still for exactly 3 seconds in the way she did when she was trying not to look too pleased about something. Then she looked back down at her worksheet. "Good," she said, in a voice that was working very hard to be casual. "I have some questions for her." "About the case?" "Some of them," Sophie said. "Not all of them." He looked at his daughter and thought, not for the first time, not for the last, that she was going to be fine. Whatever came next, Whatever the hearing produced, whatever the world turned out to be, Sophie Cole was going to look it straight in the face and find the thing worth asking about. Her mother had been like that. He was starting, slowly, to believe he might be a little like that too. The burgers were excellent. Sophie had declared this within the first 2 bites, with the solemn authority of someone delivering an official verdict. Mara had laughed, a real laugh, the unguarded kind, and Nathan had watched the 2 of them across the table and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for a very long time. They stayed at the restaurant for 2 hours. Sophie asked Mara 11 questions, which Nathan counted because he was that kind of father. 4 were about the case. 3 were about what it was like to run a company. 1 was about whether Mara had ever been to Paris, which led to a 15-minute conversation that Nathan mostly listened to. And the last 3 were personal questions, delivered with the matter-of-fact directness of a child who hasn't yet learned that some things aren't asked at dinner tables. About Mara's father, about whether she was lonely, and about what her apartment looked like. Mara answered all 11. Fully, without deflecting, without using the careful professional distance that Nathan had noticed she sometimes kept around herself like a second blazer. She answered like someone who had decided at some point during the main course that Sophie Cole was a person who deserved straight answers. On the walk to the car, Sophie fell slightly behind. Nathan walked beside Mara, beside her chair, his hands in his pockets, and the night was cold and the streetlights were on, and the city made its particular nighttime sounds around them. He didn't say anything for half a block. She didn't either. It was the kind of silence that had become comfortable between them over the past weeks. The silence of 2 people who no longer felt the need to fill every space. She asked if you were lonely, Nathan said finally. She did, Mara said. What did you tell her? I told her I used to be, Mara said, and that lately, I'm less sure about the answer. He looked straight ahead. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Behind them, Sophie was looking at something on the sidewalk with deep personal interest, giving them the space that children sometimes give adults when they understand more than anyone has given them credit for. The hearing began on a Tuesday morning, in a courtroom that smelled like old paper and floor wax, the way courtrooms always do, as if the building itself is trying to tell you that whatever happens here has happened 1,000 times before and will happen 1,000 times again. Nathan sat at the plaintiff's table, with Carol to his left, James beyond her, and Derek Hull 2 seats down, his hands flat on the table in front of him, still and present. Gloria Marsh sat behind them in the gallery, with her coat folded across her lap and her chin level, wearing the expression of a woman who had dressed carefully for this and intended to be seen. Mara sat in the gallery as well, her choice, deliberate. She had told Carol she would testify if called, but would not sit at the plaintiff's table. This case is Nathan's, she'd said, and Derek's and Gloria's. I'm a witness, not a protagonist. Carol had argued briefly and then stopped arguing, because Mara Sullivan said things in a tone that made further argument feel structurally unsound. Dominic Falcone sat at the defense table in a suit that cost more than Nathan's monthly rent. He did not look at Nathan when Nathan came in. He looked at the judge. He looked at his attorney. He looked occasionally at his phone under the table, with the phone-checking habit of a man who was used to being the most important thing in any room, and found the absence of that status physically uncomfortable. His attorney was good. Nathan had been warned about this. The opening argument was polished and precise. It acknowledged the video, acknowledged that the events of October 14th had been imperfectly handled, used the phrase regrettable miscommunication 3 times, and then pivoted hard to the defamation claim, arguing that Nathan's statements, public, viral, viewed by millions, had caused documented and measurable harm to Bissimo's business, its employees, its reputation in the community. Mr. Cole, the attorney said, is not a civil rights advocate. He is not an attorney. He is not a disability rights expert. He is a private citizen who made inflammatory accusations in front of cameras, and those accusations have destroyed the livelihood of a man who has operated a business in this city for 20 years. Carol's response was quiet, unhurried. She stood at the podium and she did not raise her voice once. Mr. Falcone's attorney is correct that Nathan Cole is not an expert, she said. He is a delivery driver and a father. He watched a woman be turned away from a restaurant because of her wheelchair, and he said what he saw. The question before this court is not whether his words were inflammatory. The question is whether they were true. She paused. We will demonstrate that they were true. We will demonstrate that they were true not once, but across 14 documented incidents spanning 4 years, involving a deliberate and systematic practice of excluding customers with disabilities from Bissimo's dining room. We will further demonstrate that 3 formal complaints about this practice were buried through an arrangement between Mr. Falcone's operations team and a city official who has since cooperated with the State Attorney General's office. Another pause. When words are true, Mr. Falcone, they are not defamation. They are facts. Nathan looked at the table in front of him. He thought about $47. He thought about the reservation under the name Cole, party of 2. He thought about Sophie in her dress, pressing her palm to the car window 3 months ago, saying, "Dad, look at those lights." He thought, we've come a long way from those lights. Derek testified on the first day. He sat in the witness box and he told the story exactly the way he'd told it to Nathan in the coffee shop, in the flat, precise voice of a man reading from a report, the same report he'd been carrying in his chest for 9 months. He did not perform emotion. He did not lean into the drama of it. He said what happened. He said what Falcone said. He said what his wife's face looked like. He said what his daughter sounded like crying in the back seat. He said all of it in the same steady voice, and it was the steadiness that made it devastating. The restraint of a man who had decided that accuracy was more powerful than feeling, that the facts themselves, spoken plainly, were enough. Falcone's attorney cross-examined him for 40 minutes. He got nowhere. Derek answered every question in the same tone, the same pace, without being baited, without being redirected. He had the patience of a man who had survived things that made courtroom cross-examinations feel, comparatively, manageable. When he stepped down, Nathan caught his eye. Derek gave a single small nod. The nod of a man who had done what he came to do. Gloria testified the following morning. She was different from Derek in every way. Smaller, softer-voiced, 71 years old with white hair and reading glasses on a chain. And she was, in Nathan's observation, the most effective witness he had ever seen. Not because she was theatrical, because she was completely herself. She described the anniversary dinner the same way she described it to Nathan on the phone. The wine Bernard had ordered, the good suit, the host who came back to the table and redirected them with practiced politeness while their window table was being given to someone else. She described the drive home. She described what Bernard had said over the pasta. When she said, "I just wanted to take you somewhere nice, Glo," there was no sound in the courtroom for a full 3 seconds. Falcone's attorney chose not to cross-examine her. Nathan thought that was probably the smartest decision the man had made since the case began. The third day was when Roy Sutter's documentation was entered into evidence. Nathan had read it in summary form through Carol's briefings, but hearing it read into the record, in the clean, legal language of a court proceeding, made it newly stark. The emails between Sutter and Falcone's operations manager, the catering contract figures, the text messages, and it was these that landed hardest, because text messages don't have the smoothed-over quality of formal correspondence. They are what people actually say when they believe no one else is watching. One message from the operations manager to Sutter, sent the day after the third accessibility complaint was filed, read simply, "Same as before. He appreciates it." Dominic Falcone's face, during the reading of that message, did not change. It held the expression he had been maintaining for 3 days, composed, attentive, the face of a man performing the experience of having nothing to be ashamed of.
But Nathan watched his hands, and his hands, under the table, were very still in the way that hands are still when they're working hard to stay that way.
Carol rested the plaintiff's case on the afternoon of the third day. She did it without fanfare, without a summation speech, in the same matter-of-fact tone she'd used throughout. The facts were in. The documentation was in. 14 victims were on record. The state's independent findings were submitted as supporting evidence. She sat down and looked at her notepad and made a small check mark. That evening, Falcone's attorney called Carol. Nathan was at home making pasta. Sophie had been right. It was what he made when he was thinking. When Carol called him at 8 o'clock and said the 4 words he had been simultaneously hoping for and unprepared to hear. He wants to settle. Nathan turned the stove down. On what terms? Full public apology. Written statement to be approved by our team before release. Mandatory accessibility renovation of Bissimo within 90 days. To be verified by an independent inspector. $150,000 each to Derek, Gloria, and you. No NDA. No non-disparagement. No restrictions. She paused. And an additional $500,000 to be placed in a fund, the structure to be determined by Mara's team, for accessibility advocacy in the region. Nathan stood at the stove for a moment. The pasta water was starting to boil. He turned it off entirely. "What does Carol think?" he asked, and then caught himself. "I mean, what do you think?" "I think we'd win at trial," Carol said. "I think the documentation is airtight, and the witnesses were exceptional. I also think a trial takes another 4 months minimum, costs more money, costs Derek and Gloria 4 more months of this being the open wound in their lives. And this settlement contains everything we actually wanted. The apology, the renovations, the public record, the fund." No silence. No NDA. A pause. The only thing a trial gives you that this doesn't is a judge saying the words out loud in a courtroom, which matters symbolically. But it doesn't change what's in the agreement. Nathan looked at the cold pot on the stove. He looked at Sophie's drawing on the refrigerator, still there, slightly curled at the corner now from weeks of being magneted to the door. The yellow windows, the possible sun. "I need to call Derek and Gloria," he said. He called Derek first. Derek listened to the terms in silence. Then he said, "The apology has to name names. My wife's name, my daughter's. It can't be a general, 'We're sorry' to those affected." He says Tanya's name. He says Keely's name. "I'll make that a condition," Nathan said. "Then yes," Derek said. Gloria picked up on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. Nathan read her the terms. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "The fund," she said. "The accessibility fund." "Can Bernard's name be on it?" Nathan closed his eyes. "I will make sure of it," he said. "Then yes," Gloria said. "And Nathan," a pause, "Bernard would have liked you very much." He couldn't speak for a moment. "Thank you," he managed. "That means a lot to me." The public apology was released on a Friday morning, 10 days after the settlement was signed. Dominic Falcone stood outside Bissimo, in front of a small gathering of reporters and cameras, and read from a prepared statement that Carol's team had written, revised 4 times, and approved. He said the names: Tanya Hall, Keeley Hall, Bernard Marsh, Horace Webb, and 11 others, by name, one after another, each one a person he had looked through or talked around or escorted out with practiced politeness. He read each name with the flat affect of a man performing an act he did not feel, and everyone watching understood that. The insincerity was visible. It was almost physical. But it didn't matter. The names were said out loud. The record existed. The apology was on camera, attributed, irreversible. Nathan watched it on his phone in his delivery car, parked in the same dollar store parking lot where he'd taken Carol's call about the first settlement offer. He watched Dominic say the names and he felt not satisfaction exactly, not triumph, something quieter than that. The particular feeling of a door that has been stuck for a long time finally moving on its hinges. Not open yet, but moving. He called Mara. "I watched it," she said before he spoke. "He said the names," Nathan said. "He said the names," she confirmed. "It's done." He looked at the dollar store. A woman was coming out with 2 bags. A kid was on a bike in the parking lot, doing lazy circles. "Is it, though?" he said. "Is it done? Because he's still going to own that restaurant. He's still going to be the same man." The renovations happen, the apologies on record, and then 6 months from now, Mara said, the Bernard and Gloria Marsh Accessibility Fund will have made its first round of grants to organizations that do this work full-time. Derek Hall has been contacted by 2 veterans advocacy groups who want him to speak about his experience. Horace Webb's granddaughter wrote an op-ed that's being picked up by 3 newspapers. The state has opened a broader audit of accessibility complaint handling across all city departments. She paused. And Bissimo's Yelp rating is 2.1. Nathan laughed. It came out involuntary. Real. "The work doesn't end," Mara said. "But this part of it ends. And this part mattered." He sat with that for a moment. Then, "I keep thinking about that first night," he said. "Standing outside. $47. I was trying to figure out if there was a way I could get Sophie and me through dinner without embarrassing either of us." "And then a woman in a wheelchair showed up," Mara said. "And then a woman in a wheelchair showed up," he agreed. "And she had a reservation, and she was turned away." He paused. "I didn't do it for a fund, or a lawsuit, or a press conference. I just couldn't watch it happen without saying something." "I know," Mara said. Her voice was quiet and direct, the way it got when she was saying something she'd been thinking about for a while. "That's why everything else happened. Not because of the lawyers, or the documentation, or the money. Because you couldn't watch it happen without saying something." A pause. "Most people can. You couldn't. That's not small, Nathan." He didn't answer for a moment. The parking lot was ordinary around him. The dollar store, the dry cleaner, the kid on the bike still circling. An ordinary afternoon in an ordinary part of the city. The kind of place that never makes any lists, that nobody photographs for a restaurant review, that Dominic Falcone had never once driven through. "Sophie wants to know when you're coming back," Nathan said. Mara laughed. "Tell her 2 weeks. I have things to finish in New York." "She's going to have more questions ready." "I'm counting on it," Mara said. 6 months later, Nathan was still driving his delivery route. He had considered other things. Carol had mentioned, once, that a disability rights organization had called about a community outreach position. And Marcus had pointed out that Nathan had become, without intending to, Something of a public figure who could do things with that if he wanted. Nathan had thought about it. He thought about it the way he thought about most large things. Carefully, slowly, at the kitchen table after Sophie was asleep. He decided he wasn't done driving yet. There was something about the work that he'd never been able to explain to anyone. Something about moving through the ordinary streets of the city and knowing where things were and delivering what people needed and doing it well and quietly. His wife had understood it. She'd said once that Nathan was the kind of person who was most himself when he was being useful, without anyone making a speech about it. So he kept the route. He picked up a new shift. He got the phone screen fixed. On a Saturday morning in April, he drove to Mara's hotel. She was in the city for a development meeting, and picked her up and drove to a diner that Sophie had chosen because she'd read online it had the best pancakes in the city, and she had strong opinions about pancakes that required testing. The diner had 3 steps at the entrance and no ramp. Nathan looked at the steps. He looked at Mara. She was already looking at the steps with the expression he had come to recognize. Not the expression of devastation, not the expression of rage, but the particular bone-deep weariness of someone who has done this calculation so many times, it barely registers as a surprise anymore. "Call them," Sophie said, pulling out her own phone. She had looked up the diner's number before Nathan could reach for his. "If they don't have a ramp, they need to know they need one." Nathan looked at his daughter, 12 now, her mother's eyes, her mother's set jaw, her own particular fearlessness that she had assembled from the pieces of both of them. She was already talking to someone on the phone, calm and clear. "Hi, I'm calling because your entrance isn't accessible for wheelchairs. I want to let you know that's required by law, and also, it's not okay." A pause. "Yes, I'll hold." Mara looked at Nathan. Nathan looked back at her. "She's 12, he said. "I know," Mara said. "She's 12, and she just cold-called a diner about accessibility law." "I heard." Mara's voice was careful, warm, holding something that was almost but not quite the thing he'd been waiting for her to say out loud. "She's remarkable." "She really is," Nathan said. Sophie was still on the phone. She gave a small, satisfied nod at whatever the person on the other end said. "Thank you," she told them. "I appreciate that. We'll come back when it's done." She hung up. She looked at the two of them looking at her. "They said they'd look into it," she said, "which probably means nothing, but maybe it doesn't." She shrugged, with the philosophical practicality of a person who has made peace with the difference between what you can control and what you can't. "Now where else can we get pancakes?" Nathan started to answer. Mara was already pulling up a search on her phone. They stood on the sidewalk in the April morning, the city moving around them in its ordinary way, and Nathan felt, in no dramatic flash, in no single clarifying moment, but in the accumulated weight of everything that had led here, that his life had changed. Not in the way of before and after, in the way of slowly and then all at once, in the way of saying something true in a restaurant lobby on a Thursday night in October, and following that single true thing wherever it needed to go. He had done the right thing, not because he was brave, not because he was exceptional, not because he had money or power or a plan. He had done it because his daughter was watching, and because the alternative, standing there with everything inside him that knew better and saying nothing, was simply no longer something he was capable of. That turned out to be enough. It turned out, in fact, to be everything.